I'm blown away by what's happening, because we look at the environment we're in, and you have increasingly a lot of regulation. You and I have talked about this before, don't mess with Texas kind of thing. A lot of regulation. You have an environment that is really about making sure that ESG and DEI requirements are being serviced, if you would, at sometimes, especially when it comes to some stocks like Disney, right, or others, it gets serviced ahead of the actual ability of the company to make profits. And Elon's like, which is kind of ironic and kind of funny, because you think about what he's created, right? And they don't give him any credit for the fact that he's got this really ESG friendly Tesla company. Instead, he's like, I don't want to deal with this ESG, this DEI nonsense. I just want to make these cars and run a good and efficient business. So he's kind of thumbing his nose at everything. And this includes, by the way, even just the Delaware courts. And why is this important? I mean, it's very important to understand, I think, the role that the Delaware courts have historically played. I mean, this is something that people don't really often really think about, but Delaware is the be-all, end-all as far as businesses are concerned. I mean, Delaware is kind of the whole show, and everybody incorporates in Delaware. And Elon's like, I don't think I like Delaware very much right now, because he had an agreement in place with shareholders that he was going to get paid a certain amount of money. It was like massive, right? Something like $40 billion if he met certain metrics. And he didn't take a salary, but he said, here's the deal. Like, if I meet these metrics, I want to get paid. And the shareholders ratified that agreement twice. And yet you had some law firm with some guy who had like 8 shares in Tesla coming forward and saying, you know what? We don't think this is fair. So forget the fact that the board allowed this twice. We don't think this is fair. And so the Delaware courts sided with the law firm. Incidentally, they were willing to give the law firm, I think the law firm was asking for like $10 billion in compensation, which is wild, because they didn't even, they didn't create the company. They just sued it. And Elon said, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm going to Texas. And, you look at what's going on in Texas, you've got the TXSE starting up, Rob. And I think there's a good chance now that more companies will follow Elon's lead. What's your take on Tesla, Delaware, and the future of, frankly, New York City as the financial capital of the world?
Yep. Well, maybe it'll be Dallas next. It's really interesting.
It might be.
In the context of the Texas Stock Exchange, that comes in as part of this broader trend of Texas actually positioning itself to compete with Delaware as a place for businesses to be incorporated. So just the context here, as you mentioned, it's something like 2/3 of all Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware. And, there's multiple reasons for that. But one of the main reasons is that in Delaware, they have these specialized business courts called the Delaware Chancery Court. Mm-hmm. And actually, at the early part of my career, when I used to do merger arbitrage, I spent a lot of time kind of actually in Delaware sometimes, but kind of like involved in these merger situations, because they were always adjudicated in Delaware Chancery Court. And it has a historical reputation of being very shareholder friendly. But it's also a place where all of these complex commercial disputes can be adjudicated, by judges and not by juries. So corporations like that, because there's predictability and there's precedence, and it's not like jackpot justice, which you might find in these other states where some jury can, right? So Texas has actually been addressing this, though. Last year they passed a law. The state legislature passed a law to create their own specialized business courts that would basically be similar to the Delaware Chancery Courts. Those are expected to go into effect in September of this year. And I think another interesting opportunity for Texas, Bill Barr, late last year, in November of last year, wrote, former Attorney General, with another attorney, they co-authored a piece that made it into the Wall Street Journal, talking about how the Delaware Chancery Courts, the Delaware courts in general, their stance towards ESG was actually an existential risk for Delaware, because this is a little bit, it's a little bit arcane, but basically what the courts have come through various decisions, they've come to embrace the idea that ESG is a form of risk management, as opposed to what I tend, and that's always how the ESG movement portrays itself, right? Like,
Right.
I view ESG as kind of a political movement, a political ideology that seeks to, kind of impose itself on companies. But the way it does that is by saying, no, this is a form of risk management, that this is actually protecting shareholder interests. So they package it as this is,
as you know, yeah, you have to do this because otherwise you're going to get lawsuits, or you don't want to have, and to a certain extent, right? You don't want to have an oil spill, and you don't want to be sued because you had an oil spill. But then you can take it to the extreme, which is where it's gotten these days. And so it's no longer about protecting your company from risk to shareholders. It's more about a political ideology that has kind of gotten out of control. I mean, I think Larry Fink from BlackRock, who championed this so early on, he said this as well. I mean, he's interestingly one of the backers too at TXSE. And I think that a lot of the community that originally thought, oh, isn't this a great idea? Because they thought you could marry sort of markets with some appreciation for the world in which we live, et cetera. But unfortunately, that appreciation became very political and very opportunistic. And suddenly, you're not making the money you should. The profits aren't there to support the politicization, if you would, of Wall Street.
Yep. And, specifically in Delaware, what people are concerned about and what Bill Barr flagged is that there's this idea that's called the Caremark doctrine. It's based on precedent. And it's the idea that not only are companies allowed to prioritize ESG objectives, they're almost obligated to, and it's being kind of packaged like in the interests of investors and shareholders. So now it's creating a liability for companies incorporated in Delaware who could potentially be sued for failures by company directors or officers to abide by ESG policies. So that's this opportunity, I think, that Texas has where, here originally people were questioning, is ESG even permitted under concepts of fiduciary obligation or shareholder interest? And now it's evolving to ESG is required, and there's liability if you don't pursue ESG policies. So so it's like onerous.
It's really, we've talked about it, Rob and I talk every day, and we talk about a lot of these things at length. It's partly why we're actually here having our daily conversation with all, around some of these big topics. We want to have that with you, and I'm going to get to some of your questions and comments momentarily. We got a big tune in, so it's exciting. I think people are very much interested in some of these tech issues and tech opportunities right now, which is important. But, Rob, it's just unbelievable how much the ESG, DEI, and I think, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say it came from a good place. It's just that the minute you get some politicians involved, and believe me, that's exactly what was recognized, it turns to this kind of woke capitalism. Vivek really, he did a great job. He coined the expression effectively with that book, Woke Capitalism. And it's something that you and I have talked about in depth for years. It's just taken over everything. But what I love, and this is about, sort of the foundation of who we are as a country, and we're both pretty patriotic, hence the name 76research.com. What I love is that there's a response, right? For every crazy wackadoo thing that comes out of the DEI ESG craze and the non-profit, non-market centered ideology there, you've got a counter. And this is what Texas is doing right now. Bill Barr laid it out a year ago in the Wall Street Journal op-ed that you're referring to. And I think that, somebody smart is like, wait a second, we need to do something different. We need the antithesis of this, or not even the antithesis. We just need a normal environment for which companies can go public and access the capital markets, because you can't shut off half the country because they can't abide by your rules.
Yep. And I think, when you put this in the context of the Texas stock, all the pieces are starting to come together. And I think Dallas is really making, and Texas in general is really making a big run for becoming a major financial capital. And I think they've got a good shot. The problem is,
I do too. By the way, hey, You had me at taxes, right? 0% income tax in Texas. I wish New Hampshire had figured this out first. But look, Texas has already got a firm, solid footing. I'm from New Hampshire. That's why I say that. Live free or die, right? I mean, I say that also because there's 0% income tax as well. So New Hampshire has it going on. If we could just keep all those people from Massachusetts moving up. Sorry, that's an old rivalry. But look, Texas is awesome. I love Texas. I love people from Texas. I love the strength and character, the bigness of Texas overall, and the independence of Texas. And I love what they're doing here, because why should New York get it all, right? Look, Florida's figured it out too. Hey, maybe if we offer a better living scenario for people, and look, the cost of living is going up there significantly, as it is everywhere, but people figured out, if I don't have to work in New York, if I don't have to live in the Northeast, I don't need to, right? Like, if I don't have to be here, maybe there's an opportunity. And so you've got financial centers opening up. I mean, Carl Icahn took his whole shop right down to Miami because it's a nicer quality of life and there's no taxes. And so Texas is now, really competitive on this front. And I think they have the infrastructure to do it.
Yep. And they're developing it, right? It's going to be a little bit it's going to be difficult to break that, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ duopoly. It's going to be difficult to break that Delaware, 2/3 of all major, Fortune 500 company, right? These are kind of entrenched monopolies, but I think they're off to a good start, and it's probably healthy to have this competition, both for the stock exchange and for the Delaware court system.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, and I love seeing it. And I get a kick out of Elon sort of championing all of this, right? Like he's out there saying, this doesn't work, let's fix it. So go Texas, keep up the hard work. I think that it makes a ton of sense.